Snow had fallen through the night in a hush so deep it seemed the mountains themselves had paused to listen. The drifts piled thick along the ridge, wrapping the world in a white silence, as if the land had forgotten war, hunger, and the tremble of man. In the stillness, smoke rose from a lone chimney, curling into the gray morning like a prayer. The cabin stood as it always had, stooped and solid, its logs blackened from years of firewood and storms. Moss clung to the north face. Icicles dangled from the eaves like old teeth. Behind it, pine trees leaned inward, whispering the things they'd seen. Soldiers passing, deer torn open by wolves, and the slow turning of a woman's hair from dark to silver. Inside, Miriam Caldwell stirred a pot of coffee on the wood-burning stove. Her hands, though aged, moved with grace, each gesture softened by the 1,000 mornings that had come before. Her husband, Jedediah, sat near the hearth, sharpening a blade on a worn leather strop. His eyes were the color of creek stone, dulled but steady, watching the fire the way one watches memory. Neither spoke much. Words, they'd learned, were like bread, useful, but you didn't waste them when silence would do. It was Jedediah who first saw her. He had stepped out just after dawn, boots crunching into the snow, breath rising like mist. The trees stood solemn in the hush, and something in the air, not sound, not scent, just a pull in the gut, turned his eyes eastward. She was there, not 20 paces from the tree line, her form half buried in drift. Blood had painted the snow dark around her legs, a terrible bloom against the white. At first, Jed thought she was already dead. The birds hadn't come for her. That meant she was still warm. Maybe. He called over his shoulder, low but urgent. Miriam was there before the wind could take the word. She saw the girl, dropped to her knees without a question. Skin the color of copper bark. Raven-dark hair stuck to her face. No older than 20. Maybe younger. Miriam's fingers pressed to the girl's throat. "She breathes," she whispered, as if louder words might scatter the fragile thing they'd found. Jed looked toward the trees. Empty, still. But the forest never truly slept. "We can't leave her here. I know that. She's Comanche. She's a child." Jedediah hesitated. Not out of cruelty. Not even fear, though it wore that face. Just memory. They had lost a son to a raid 15 years past. Folks in the valley spoke of blood debts and revenge, but Jed had buried his boy with a rusted locket and stopped speaking the names of enemies after that. Still, some ghosts grew roots. "Help me lift her," Miriam said, and there was no more debate. They carried her carefully, arms and legs trailing like broken branches. Her breath rasped in short bursts. Heat poured from her like fever, and the blood had begun to freeze along her thighs. Inside the cabin, Miriam laid her by the fire, wrapped her in their best quilt, the one with blue stitching shaped like stars. Jed stared down, fists knotted at his sides. She might bring trouble. Then let it come. Miriam's voice held steel, quiet but unyielding. She had buried a child, too. And kindness, when it came, didn't come with fine timing. Jed returned to the porch, sat in the rocker, rifle across his lap. He watched the line of trees, waiting for movement, a shape, a flicker. But the woods stayed still. The snow fell softer now, like ash. Inside, Miriam worked. She cleaned the girl's wounds with hot water and herbs from the shelf. The worst was a gash across her ribs, deep enough to worry. She stitched it with slow hands and whispered to her in Cheyenne, the old tongue her mother taught her long ago. The girl stirred once, eyes fluttering, but did not wake. Afternoon wore on. Jed did not move from the porch. By twilight, the girl's fever had broken. Miriam sat beside her, stroking her hair. The girl's skin had lost its pallor. Her breathing came steadier, deeper. Jed came in at last, snow caked on his boots. His shoulders looked heavier than they had that morning. He paused in the doorway, the fire casting him in amber. "She speak yet?" "No. But she'll live through the night, I think." They ate in silence. Cornbread, beans, and the last of the smoked venison. The girl slept. Miriam watched her the way one watches a newborn fawn, wary but gentle. Jed's eyes kept flicking toward the window. The trees no longer felt still. "She didn't crawl all the way up here alone," he muttered, voice like gravel. "I know. She's being looked for." Miriam nodded. "Then it's good we found her first." That night, the wind came up, and the fire snapped loudly in the hearth. Outside, darkness pressed against the cabin like a living thing. Jed checked the rifle again, then lay down on the cot near the door. Miriam stayed by the girl. She'd placed a damp cloth on her forehead, and now she hummed a song too old for words. Sometime past midnight, the girl stirred. Not fully awake, but caught in that space between dream and pain. Her lips moved. A name, maybe. A plea. Miriam leaned close, tried to catch it, but the girl drifted again. Jed lay with one eye open, listening. The morning came with a sky like iron and snow drifting lazy from the clouds. Miriam opened the door just after sunrise to fetch water from the barrel and froze. Jed heard her breath catch. He rose, rifle in hand, came to her side. They stood together, silent. Along the ridge, just beyond the outer tree line, riders sat astride painted horses. Phil. Watching. Maybe 20. Maybe more, farther back, half-veiled in snow and branches. War paint. Lances. Faces hard as flint. Jed felt the weight settle in his chest like an old injury waking up. Miriam stepped back inside, calm but pale. "They've come for her," she said. Jed shut the door slowly, latched it, turned to the fire, where the girl still lay sleeping. He did not speak, just stood there a long while, hat in his hands, eyes tracing the gentle rise and fall of her chest beneath the quilt. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. But for reasons he didn't yet understand, he did not feel the need to run. The sound came first, low, rhythmic, hollow like the echo of thunder caught in the bones of the trees. Jedediah heard it before he saw them. It started just after dawn, when the sky was washed with the blue of a blade, and the birds had gone quiet. He sat on the porch with his cup cooling in his hand, not drinking, not blinking. The wind was still, but the snow stirred in strange trembling patterns, as though the ground itself knew something waited beyond it. The drumming came from deep in the woods, not the wild pounding of war cries or rage, but something steadier, older, like ceremony, like reckoning. Each beat was a question. And then they appeared. One by one, the shapes emerged through the gray curtain of trees, riders silent and upright, horses moving like ghosts across the snow. They did not yell. They did not brandish weapons. They only watched, eyes dark beneath painted brows, faces stilled by purpose. No less than 100 by the time they circled the clearing, a full war party. Jed had not seen such a sight in 20 years, not since the valleys bled and both sides lost too much to count. He did not move. The rifle lay across his lap, but he did not lift it. He only stared, heart slow but heavy, and let the quiet settle over his shoulders like an old coat he'd thought long burned. Inside the cabin, Miriam stood at the window, hands pressed to the sill. The girl stirred in her sleep, murmured something soft and broken. Miriam leaned in close, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's cheek, then looked toward the door. "They've come," she said. Her voice did not shake, though her body wanted to. Jed gave a slight nod. She awake? Not yet. But her fevers dropped. He rose, slow and deliberate, set the rifle by the door, and stepped back out onto the porch. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The sun rose behind the trees, throwing long bars of light between the pines. A tall man on a black horse moved forward from the line. His headdress trailed behind him, streaked with red and crow-feather black. His eyes were sharp as obsidian and held none of the prideful arrogance Jed expected. The man dismounted without a word, walking with the weight of command. Jed stepped off the porch to meet him halfway. They stood across from each other, the cold between them alive with memory. "I am bear with no song," the man said. His voice was even, rich with gravity. "The girl is mine." Jed nodded once. "She's inside. Alive. Was when I came out this morning." Bear with no song looked past him to the cabin. His eyes softened for a flicker. Not long, not enough to betray anything, but it was there. She should not have been alone. Jed looked him over carefully. She wasn't. Someone made sure of that. At that, Bear with no song said nothing. The air thickened. Behind the chieftain, the warriors remained unmoving, their horses shifting lightly but never breaking the ring. Not one voice among them. Just the soft breathing of beasts and the creak of leather under muscle. Jed turned slightly, gesturing back toward the cabin. She's not in any shape to go. You take her now, she won't live the hour. A beat passed. She is my daughter. I figured. The man's jaw tightened. His hands were empty, but they twitched like they remembered holding steel. Jed didn't flinch. No one here's keeping her. She's got 2 feet, and when she can walk on him again, she'll choose where they carry her. Another long pause. Then the Comanche leader gave a slow nod and returned to his horse. At dusk, I will come again. If she remains by her own will. But no more time after that. Jed didn't answer. He watched the man mount and ride back through the line. The warriors opened and closed around him like reeds around a fish. Then stillness returned. He stood there long after they settled, waiting for a sign, a sound, anything that might explain what would come next. But the only answer was the wind moving through the trees in the same slow rhythm as the drumming before. Inside, the girl opened her eyes. Miriam was at her side, placing a damp cloth on her forehead when she felt the shift in breath, that subtle quickening that meant returning. The girl blinked once, then again, her gaze sharp but cloudy. Miriam sat back just slightly, letting the girl see her clearly. "You're safe," she said gently. The girl frowned, lips dry and cracked. "Where?" Her voice rasped like sand through a sieve. "You were hurt. We found you in the snow, near dead. My husband brought you in." The girl's eyes drifted toward the fire, then back. "I was running. You don't have to tell it all now. Just rest." The girl shook her head, slow, pained. "They chased us. Soldiers. We were camped not far from the ridge. My cousin was hit. I don't know if she—" I ran. Miriam reached for a canteen, pressing it to the girl's lips. "You did right to run. You're here now." "They will come," the girl said, hoarse and tired. "They're already here," Miriam whispered. The girl tried to sit, then winced and fell back. Her brow furrowed in frustration. "I have to." "You're not going anywhere until your wounds close, child. Don't make me tie you down." The girl tried a breath, half a laugh. "You are not afraid of me?" Miriam smiled sadly. "I'm too old to waste fear. And I've buried enough to know kindness costs less than hate." The girl lay still, considering this. Her eyes roamed the room, simple walls, shelves lined with jars, a quilt hung near the bed. Everything stitched by hand, used by hand, worn by love. She relaxed a little. "What's your name?" Miriam asked. "Tahana." Miriam nodded. "I'm Miriam. My husband's Jed. He's watching your kin now, just outside." Tahana's lips parted. "My father. He didn't give me your name, but he said he'd return at dusk. He seems a careful man. Not cruel." Tahana looked toward the window, worry pulling at the corners of her face. "He is not cruel. But if he thinks you keep me against my will—" "We don't." Tahana's voice lowered. "He will burn your house to the ground." Miriam didn't flinch. "Then we best make sure he knows the truth." The rest of the day passed like snow falling on water. Slow, quiet, with something heavy beneath it. Jed stayed on the porch, his rifle leaning against the doorframe but untouched. He didn't feel like a soldier. He felt like a man who'd built a life from sawdust and grief, and now watched it threatened not by violence, but by the weight of someone else's wounds. Inside, Miriam fed Tahana broth spoon by spoon. The girl didn't speak much, but she accepted the care. She watched Miriam closely, as if trying to find the trap in her tenderness, but there wasn't one. Near mid-afternoon, Jed stepped in for the first time since morning. His boots shed snow at the door. He looked tired but grounded, like a tree that had stood through windstorms too many times to care what the sky did next. Tahana's eyes met his. She tensed. Jed raised one brow. You always run toward trouble, or was today special? Tahana blinked. He sounded more like a schoolmaster than a threat. I didn't plan to end up here. No one plans to end up where they bleed. Miriam frowned. Jed. He grunted. Just saying what's true. Tahana sat up straighter, wincing as her ribs pulled. You don't want me here. Jed stared at her a long moment, then shook his head. Didn't want a busted roof, either. But when something breaks in your yard, you fix it. Doesn't matter who dropped it. Tahana's brows drew down, uncertain if that was kindness or not. Just rest, Miriam said. When your father comes, we'll speak honest. Outside, the sun bent low. The light stretched long across the clearing, turning the snow gold at the edges, casting shadows like old scars across the trees. Tahana stirred again, unease brewing in her chest. He will come armed, Jed said. So will I. But I'll come standing. She looked at him. Something about the way he stood, the lines of his face, made her believe he'd once stood before worse and lived. When the first rider moved forward again, just before the sun vanished behind the hills, Jed stepped onto the porch without his rifle. He did not raise his voice. He simply called out, She's awake. She can speak for herself. Bear with no song dismounted again. This time, he approached the door slowly, hand on his belt, not in threat, but in habit. Inside, Tahana stood on weak legs. Miriam supported her as they walked to the door. When her father stepped into view, Tahana did not speak at first. She looked at him, at his solemn eyes, at the paint still streaked across his jaw. Then she stepped forward, leaving Miriam's arm, her breath shallow. I live, she said, because they saved me. Her father's mouth moved, but no words came. I will not leave tonight, she said softly. I owe them that. Bear with no song looked past her at the old couple, then back. A breath left him, long and heavy. Then we wait, he said, and returned to the trees. And the snow fell quietly again. The fire crackled with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each pop a word unsaid, each flicker a memory chasing its own tail through time. Night had folded itself over the cabin, deep and still, save for the whisper of wind curling through the pines. Inside, the hearth glowed warm against the cold walls, casting gold across the floorboards where shadows danced like spirits with no more need for names. Tahana sat near the flames, legs drawn up beneath the quilt Miriam had tucked around her shoulders. Her dark hair, still damp from the cloth Miriam had run gently through it, fell loose across her back. Her face was calmer now, not unburdened, but steadier, as though some tether had been tied between her ribs and this small room with its creaking floor, its scent of pine ash and old bread. Miriam moved quietly around the cabin, refilling cups, folding cloths, setting things in their place not because they needed it, but because hands needed something to do when the world tilted. Jed sat at the table, whittling a stick down to a point that served no purpose. He hadn't spoken in some time, though his eyes flicked now and again toward the window, where nothing but darkness peered back. Tahana watched him with the kind of stillness one learns after too much noise. You're waiting for them. Jed didn't look up. Not waiting. Just listening. For what? Anything that ain't quiet. She tilted her head. They won't come tonight. My father gave his word. Jed's knife stopped for a moment. I've seen men give their word with one hand and carry fire with the other. Tahana's gaze didn't waver. And you? I've done worse. Miriam stepped in before the silence could sharpen. No more talk of that tonight. Her tone was firm, but soft, like warm bread still rising. Come sit by the fire, Jed. Your bones ache more in the cold, and no sense hiding behind wood and shadows when we've got light. He hesitated, then sighed, laying the knife and stick aside. He crossed the room and lowered himself into the rocking chair beside the hearth, his knees creaking more than the wood beneath him. Tahana's voice, quiet and deliberate, rose like steam. He used to sit like that. My grandfather. always by the fire. Said that's where the spirits remembered you. Jed looked at her now, really looked. You believe in all that? She didn't smile, but her voice softened. Belief isn't always choice. Sometimes it's just what's left when the dying is done. Miriam sat down across from her, her hands folded in her lap, fingers twined. And what's left for you now? Tahana considered that. My breath. My pain. A father too proud to say what his eyes shout. And strangers who gave me warmth without asking my name. Not strangers anymore, Miriam said gently. Tahana's eyes shimmered then, not tears, not quite, just that sheen of emotion that clings when words fail. Why did you help me? Miriam didn't answer right away. The fire shifted, spat, settled. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze distant. I once lost a daughter. Small. Fever took her before we could get help. I still remember the way her hands looked, like the petals of a flower gone dry. Tahana looked down. I see her in you, Miriam said. Not her face. Not her voice. Just the ache. The fight to keep breathing. Jed added, quieter than expected. We didn't save you out of pity. There's no weight in that. We saved you because something in this world still makes sense when kindness is given without question. Tahana let those words settle. She hadn't expected them. And they opened something inside her, not a wound, but a window. She nodded, just once, slow and deep. Then, as if by instinct, Miriam reached to the shelf and pulled down a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. She opened it carefully and revealed a small cedar box, old, with carvings so worn the patterns were more memory than image. She set it on the floor between them. Tahana looked at her in question. Miriam opened it. Inside lay trinkets, a child's button, a ribbon the color of apricots, a hairpin shaped like a flower, and one necklace, a leather cord strung with 5 simple stones, each worn smooth. Miriam picked it up, held it for a moment between her fingers. This was hers. Our girl. Eliza. I want you to have it. Tahana's breath caught. I can't. You can, Miriam interrupted, her voice trembling but firm. Not to replace. Not to erase. Just to carry something forward. That's all we're ever doing, isn't it? Carrying the warmth forward. Tahana reached out, slow, reverent, and took the necklace. Her hands, though stronger now, still trembled. She held it to her chest for a long moment, eyes closed. Outside, the wind sighed. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steady, low. My father used to sing to me when I was very small. But after the wars, after my mother was killed, he stopped. That's why they call him Bear with No Song. He gave up the sound of softness. Jed leaned forward now, elbows on his knees. Do you think he'll listen if you sing again? Tahana looked at him, startled by the question. Then she gave a ghost of a smile. He might. You'll need your strength by dawn, Miriam said, standing to place a kettle on the stove. And words, when the time comes. I'll find them, Tahana said, fingers still wrapped around the necklace. Even if I have to speak through silence. They shared the quiet after that like it was bread passed between them. The cabin, once a place of routine and repetition, now felt alive in some subtle, aching way. The fire was no longer just heat, it was memory, promise, choice. Later, after the kettle had whistled and the tea had been poured, Jed reached into his coat and pulled out a worn tobacco pouch. He rolled a cigarette with practiced hands, but didn't light it, just held it between his fingers like a relic. You think he'll come inside? He asked, not looking at either woman. Tahana shrugged. Not unless I ask him to. Jed nodded slowly. Then ask. Miriam looked at her. You don't have to choose a side, child. Not tonight. Tahana met her gaze. But I will have to by morning. And they all knew it was true. The snow outside had thickened, heavier now, blanketing the world in a silence so deep it felt sacred. The woods held their breath. And so did the people within them. Tahana stood on shaking legs and walked slowly to the door. She opened it just enough to feel the cold brush against her face, the scent of pine and frost and something wild. She stepped out barefoot, the snow shocking against her skin, but she didn't flinch. She looked toward the tree line, toward the ring of shadows just barely visible under the moon's pale gaze. "I'll find you in the morning," she whispered. The wind carried her words forward, and somewhere in the dark, a horse stirred. Back inside, Miriam helped her return to the hearth, her fingers gentle. Jed watched, unmoving, smoke curling from the unlit cigarette between his fingers. "She's brave," he muttered, more to himself than anyone. "She's someone's child," Miriam replied. "So were you once." Tahana, wrapped again in warmth, lay down with her head near the fire, her eyes watching the flames as if they spoke in languages only the scarred could understand. When she finally slept, her breathing deep and even, Miriam covered her with another quilt. She stood over her a long while, one hand resting lightly on the girl's shoulder. "She will leave tomorrow," she said softly. Jed didn't argue. He only watched the fire. "But part of her will stay," Miriam added. And with that, she sat again by the fire, her hand finding Jed's, their fingers folding together with the easy grace of years shared in both pain and peace. The embers glowed. The wind quieted. And the house, once just a cabin in the snow, felt for a moment like the very heart of something ancient and sacred. A hearth lit not just by flame, but by every unspoken word that passed between people who dared, even after all they'd lost, to keep one another warm. The stars hung low that night, heavy as old regrets, spread like frost across the ink-dark sky. No wind stirred the trees. Even the owls kept their silence. The land seemed to hold its breath, waiting for some final word to be spoken between the past and what came after. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to coals, red and patient, casting just enough glow to paint the walls with whispers. Tahana was awake long before the light touched the snow. She lay on her side, eyes open, listening to the rhythms of the old place, the soft creak of timber, the faint huff of wind pushing against the door, the quiet breath of two people who'd given her safety when nothing else had. Her body ached still, the wound in her side a dull throb, but the fever had passed and her limbs were her own again. Miriam sat at the table, candlelight flickering against the curve of her face as she threaded a needle, mending a tear in an old coat. Her hands worked without rush, each stitch small and precise, as though she were sewing not just cloth, but the very seams of time. Jedediah stood at the window, leaning slightly on the frame, watching the dark. He had not slept much, or maybe not at all. His breath fogged the glass as he exhaled slow, steady. His rifle stood nearby, untouched. He didn't need it. Not yet. His presence was enough to hold the room in its shape. Tahana pushed the quilt aside and sat up carefully, wincing only a little. Her bare feet found the wooden floor, and she steadied herself before she moved. "You're up early," Miriam said without looking up. "There's not much sleep left in me." Jed turned toward her. "You'll need your strength." She nodded. "That's why I'm on my feet." He said nothing more, and she made her way to the chair by the hearth. Miriam rose and poured her a mug of warm broth. The scent of bone and root drifted from the cup, earthy and alive. "You'll need more than courage out there," Miriam said, pressing the mug into her hands. "Words. Resolve. Mercy, too, if you can find it." "I'll find it," Tahana said, her voice low. "But it won't come first." Jed returned to the window, his shape framed by the faintest paling of the sky beyond. "He'll come early. He doesn't strike me as a man who likes waiting." "He doesn't." Tahana sipped the broth. "But he'll wait if he thinks I'm still bleeding. It gives him the moral ground." "He has that already," Jed replied. "He's your kin." Tahana looked down into the steam. "Kinship means nothing if I can't choose it." Miriam sat beside her now. "And what will you choose?" "I don't know yet." Miriam studied her face. "You do. You're just afraid to say it out loud." There was no denial. Tahana let the quiet stretch before answering. "If I go with him, I'm a daughter. A loyal one. But also silent. I return to a war that never ended. If I stay, I might become something else. something not easily named. Jed spoke, not unkindly. You'd be hunted, maybe by your own. I've already been hunted, she replied. This cabin just made it easier to stop running. Miriam reached out and placed a hand gently on her arm. Then let this be the place you decide. We have no claim to you. But this house, it keeps what's given freely. A long pause followed. Outside, a coyote howled far off, its call carried faintly down the slopes. Jed walked to the table and pulled out a small satchel, leather, stitched with years. He set it in front of Tahana. Rations, dried meat, a flint, sewing needle. You may not go far, but wherever you go, you'll go ready. Tahana stared at the bag, then looked at him. You always plan for goodbye? I plan for roads not taken, he said, even if they cross mine again. She took the bag, tucking it beside her. Her hands lingered on the strap, thumb tracing a small notch in the leather. It felt like carrying not a weapon, but a piece of someone else's faith. I should speak to him alone, she said at last. Jed nodded. He may not listen. Then I'll speak louder with silence. Dawn came like a breath held too long. The first blush of it crept through the frost-rimmed glass, pale and cautious. Outside, the snow was undisturbed, save for the long-set prints of hooves and boots frozen from the day before. And then, as if summoned by that first beam of light, the shapes emerged again, riders still and watchful, forming the quiet circle at the edge of the clearing. There was no sound, not even the drumming that had preceded them before. Only presence. Tahana stood in the doorway. Miriam helped her fasten the coat, Jed's old one, worn but sturdy, then stepped back, her fingers lingering for a moment on the girl's shoulders. I'll come back, Tahana said, not as a promise, but as a seed. Miriam nodded. Or send word. Jed handed her the small satchel, then stepped aside, his jaw tight but his eyes calm. Tahana stepped out into the snow, her boots crunching softly. Each step was a choice. Her breath curled before her like smoke from a sacred pipe, each exhale a quiet declaration. She walked until she stood halfway between the cabin and the line of riders. Her father dismounted. Bear with No Song moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps. His face, painted in faded ochre and charcoal, looked carved from storm cloud and memory. He stopped only a few feet from her, his eyes never leaving hers. I did not give permission for this meeting, he said. You do not need to, she replied. I give it. His brow furrowed, not in anger, but in caution. You are changed. I was changed before I came here. You just did not see it. You ran from death, he said. That does not make you a spirit. I ran toward life, she corrected, and found it. He stepped closer, looking her over, as if searching for wounds he could not stitch. They fed you, gave you fire, but that does not mean they are your people. Tahana's voice did not rise, but it sharpened. And what makes people belong to each other? Blood, language, war, duty. She shook her head. Then I am not your daughter by that measure. He did not speak for a long moment. The snow whispered between them. The trees stood witness. I gave you a name, he said. And I carry it, she answered. But I will not wear it like a chain. He reached into the folds of his coat and withdrew a carved object, small, wooden, shaped like a bear in mid-step. He held it out to her. You were born under the winter star, he said. This was made for you before your first teeth showed. Tahana looked at it, and her breath caught. She reached out and took it, holding it with both hands. The wood was warm from his body. She pressed it to her chest, eyes closed. I remember, she whispered. He watched her. The hard lines of his face softened, barely, but enough. Will you come with us? He asked, voice low. I will walk with you today, she said, but I will not follow. Not unless I am allowed to lead where I must. He looked past her, toward the cabin, toward the smoke curling from its chimney and the woman who stood behind the window, watching like a mother who knows every outcome still begins with love. I cannot promise you safety. I am not asking for it, she said. Only space. Bear with no song turned then, slowly. He did not nod, did not agree, but he stepped aside. Tahana turned back toward the cabin. She walked slowly, deliberately. When she reached the porch, she looked up at Miriam and Jed. Her hands were empty now, her face unreadable. I will go with them, she said. For now. Miriam's mouth parted, but she said nothing. Jed asked, You sure? Tahana nodded. There's something I have to speak to. In him. In me. Jed crossed his arms. You'll find no softness on that path. I don't need softness, she said. I just need to know the words I carry are louder than the war around them. Miriam stepped forward and hugged her, brief but fierce. Come back when you need rest, or when you need no reason at all. Tahana pressed her forehead to Miriam's shoulder, then stepped back. Jed didn't move, but he lifted his hand slightly, as if offering a quiet vow of watching. She turned and walked back to her father's side. The riders parted to let them through. As the sun rose, its full light catching the tips of the snow-laden trees, the cabin grew small behind her. But not forgotten. Not left. Tahana did not vanish into the forest. She became part of its rhythm, a moving truth wrapped in breath and blood and choice. And behind her, the fire still burned. The wind rose with the dawn, curling through the pines like breath through parted lips. It carried the scent of ash and pine sap, and something older, something like memory, or the echo of someone once beloved. Snow whipped through the branches, catching the first light in shards, as though the sky had shattered and was falling back to earth in quiet grief. From the tree line, the riders emerged again, though this time fewer. Perhaps 30 now, stripped down from the 100 who'd stood in silent judgment days before. Their numbers were lean, their movement tighter, quieter, like wolves who knew when to howl and when to wait. Tahana rode at the center. She sat her horse upright, not stiff with pride, but shaped by resolve. Her wounds were wrapped tight beneath her coat, and though her face was pale and drawn, there was a clarity in her eyes that had not been there before. She had ridden 2 days through river valleys and wooded hollows, alongside her father's band, speaking little but hearing much. At night, she sat across the fire from Bear with No Song and stared into the flames, letting silence ask the questions neither of them yet dared to form aloud. Now, as the cabin came into view again, its chimney bleeding gentle smoke into the cold sky, she felt her heart stutter. Not from fear, but from the ache of return. Home, even briefly claimed, does not leave the body easily. Bear with No Song signaled a halt with a quiet gesture. The riders stopped behind him. He did not look at her, but his voice carried. Go alone, he said. If you still must. Tahana nodded and dismounted, boots sinking into the snow. The satchel Jed had given her swung gently at her side. The bear carving rested against her heart. She walked forward, each step a blend of purpose and pain, the cold biting through the leather soles of her moccasins. The cabin remained still. No door opened. No figure emerged. Only the smoke rising, slow and unhurried. Then the door creaked. Miriam stepped out first, wrapped in a thick shawl, her gray hair plaited down her back. Her hands were bare despite the chill, and she held no weapon, no token of fear. Behind her came Jedediah, rifle slung but his hands empty, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. They did not speak. Neither did she. Until she stood close enough to smell the warmth of the stove within. I said I'd come back, Tahana said, voice low. Miriam's eyes softened. And so you have. Jed eyed the riders beyond her. Your father send you ahead to parley? No, Tahana said. I came ahead to warn. Jed's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a frown. What kind of warning? Tahana pulled a piece of cloth from her satchel. It was stained with soot and grease, but unfolded to reveal a map, hand-drawn, with notations in military script. They're coming, she said. Not Comanche. Soldiers. The ones who hunted me down before. Jed stepped closer. His gaze dropped to the map. Where'd you get this? My father took it from a scout 3 days ago. A patrol riding north of the Black Hollow. One of them spoke of a plan to clear the ridge. They mean you. This cabin. They mean to provoke something, force a fight. Miriam paled, but kept still. Why? Because we're a story they don't want told, Tahana said. A settler house protecting a Comanche girl. A chief who didn't kill in revenge. People who saw each other and didn't draw blood. That kind of peace doesn't sell rifles. Jed muttered a curse beneath his breath. How soon? Tomorrow. Maybe tonight if they ride hard. Silence dropped like a stone. Jed's jaw tightened. Then we leave. No, Tahana said. You stay. Miriam frowned. Child, if soldiers are coming, we need to get you out. You're the reason they'll push. No, Tahana repeated. I'm the reason they'll stop. Bear with No Song emerged from the line, riding slow and easy. He came alone this time, bow slung across his back, no blade drawn, no war mask. When he reached them, he dismounted and met Jed's eyes square. We will stand with you, he said. Jed raised a brow. We. The ones who remember. Who know blood must not always answer blood. Not all my riders agree. Some left this morning. But those who stayed, they stay because they believe peace must have a face. And if it must be carved into stone, then let it be carved here. Jed looked to Tahana. You put this in motion. She didn't deny it. They chased me, and now they come for the ones who saved me. I will not run again. Miriam stepped forward. Then we prepare. They did not barricade the house. There were no trenches dug, no rifles lined against windows. Instead, the cabin became a hearth again, one final time. Tahana helped Miriam make bread. Bear with No Song sat with Jed beneath the porch's overhang, the two men passing a flask of bitter-root whiskey and speaking of long trails and old regrets. The remaining warriors positioned themselves not as defenders, but as watchers, visible but calm, their presence an answer without threat. When night fell, the wind shifted, and with it came horses. Not many, no more than 15, but they came with torchlight and the ring of metal. Boots stomped through crusted snow. Commands barked in clipped tones. Jed stepped onto the porch. His rifle remained inside. Beside him stood Miriam, her shawl drawn tight. Tahana walked between them and descended the steps, the bear carving swinging gently against her chest. The soldiers arrived with faces half covered, their uniforms dulled by dirt and frost. One stepped forward, taller than the rest, with bars on his shoulder and a revolver low on his hip. I am Captain Merritt, he announced. By the authority of Fort Clayton, this land is subject to search and seizure under suspicion of harboring tribal fugitives. Jed didn't move. This land's ours. Merritt eyed Tahana. Then you'll explain why this woman was seen fleeing into the timber days ago, covered in blood. She fled, Jed said, because your men made it so. You admitting to aiding her? I'm admitting she was dying, and we chose not to let her. The captain's eyes narrowed. You are aware that doing so makes you complicit? Tahana stepped forward, her voice rising above the cold. If compassion is a crime, then take me. But know this, I am not here alone. I do not come to kill. I come to be seen. Merritt turned, confused, as the riders began to emerge from the trees. Comanche men and women, silent, on horseback, not charging but bearing witness. No weapons raised. No war cries. Just presence. We remember, one of them called out. We remember the child burned in the barn. The mother shot crossing the creek. We remember peace offered and denied. Merritt stepped back. This is not a battlefield, Tahana said. It's a threshold. What you do now writes the story. Will you make martyrs of people who lit no fire? For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of saddle leather and the slow crackling of a torch held too close to its bearer's leg. Then Merritt drew his revolver. He pointed it at Jed. Before his finger could twitch, Bear with No Song was there. His arrow found the captain's hand, Not his chest, not his head. Just the wrist. The gun fell. In the stunned hush, Jed stepped forward, picked up the revolver, and handed it to Tahana. "Choices," he said. "They always leave a shadow." Merritt stumbled back, clenching his wrist. The other soldiers didn't raise their weapons. They looked to their captain, then to the people around them, to the warriors who had not struck, to the girl who had not fled. One by one, they turned their horses. By the time the sun rose again, the soldiers were gone. No blood soaked the snow. No fire touched the cabin. Only footprints remained, some deeper than others, some light as breath. Inside, the fire crackled. Tahana stood beside it, the revolver still in her hand, though her fingers were open, loose. Jed poured coffee. Miriam baked bread. Bear with No Song rested outside, seated on the porch, eyes closed, head tilted toward the wind. And the wind, it whispered not of war, but of mercy remembered, of homes protected not by guns, but by people who refused to stop being human, of stories that did not end in violence, but in choosing, against all that history demanded, to let the light in.